St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. A quiet suburban city on the shores of Lake Ontario. Neat streets, ordinary houses, the kind of place where nothing like this was supposed to happen. This is her story. This is her crime. Karla Homolka was born on May 4, 1970, in Port Credit, Ontario. She was the eldest of 3 daughters. By all accounts, she was a bright, attractive, and seemingly ordinary young woman. In October 1987, at the age of 17, she met Paul Bernardo at a hotel restaurant in Scarborough, Ontario. He was 23 years old, charming and confident. By the end of that first evening, they were inseparable. Within 2 years, they were engaged. To everyone who knew them, they looked like the perfect couple. They were nicknamed Ken and Barbie. Nobody saw what was underneath. Before the engagement was even announced, Karla made a decision that would define everything that came after. Paul Bernardo had expressed an obsession with Karla's younger sister Tammy, who was 15 years old. On the night of December 23, 1990, Karla obtained sedatives from the veterinary clinic where she worked and used them to drug her sister's food and drink. What happened to Tammy Homolka that night, in her own family home, was one of the most disturbing facts of the entire case. Tammy stopped breathing. She was 15 years old. Her death was initially ruled accidental. Her family grieved. And Karla Homolka said nothing. What most people did not know, and what investigators would not discover until years later, was that Paul Bernardo had already been committing a series of violent sexual assaults in the Scarborough area of Toronto since 1987. He was known to police as the Scarborough Rapist. He had attacked at least 13 women, Karla knew, and she stayed. On the night of June 14, 1991, 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey was locked out of her home in Burlington, Ontario after missing her curfew. Paul Bernardo encountered her on the street. He abducted her. For the next 24 hours, Leslie Mahaffey was held captive at the home Karla and Paul shared on Bayview Drive in St. Catharines. On June 29, 1991, concrete blocks containing Leslie Mahaffey's dismembered remains were discovered in Lake Gibson. That same day, Karla and Paul were married in a lavish ceremony in Niagara-on-the-Lake. On the afternoon of April 16, 1992, 15-year-old Kristen French was walking home from school in St. Catharines when Karla and Paul pulled up alongside her in a car. Karla got out. She asked Kristen for directions using a map as a distraction. Paul grabbed her and forced her into the car. Kristen French was held captive for 3 days. She was found on April 30, 1992, in a ditch in Burlington, Ontario. Her hair had been cut off. She had been murdered. Police had been investigating the Scarborough rapes and the murders separately, without connecting them to the same person. A tip eventually led investigators to Paul Bernardo. In January 1993, Karla Homolka arrived at a hospital with serious facial injuries. She told investigators that Paul had beaten her repeatedly. She left him. And then she made the decision that would become one of the most controversial moments in Canadian legal history. She contacted prosecutors. She said she was a victim. She offered to cooperate. In May 1993, prosecutors made a deal with Karla Homolka. She would plead guilty to 2 counts of manslaughter in the deaths of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French. She would testify against Paul Bernardo. In exchange, she would receive 2 concurrent 12-year sentences. The deal was made before prosecutors had seen the full extent of the evidence. It was made before they found the videotapes. When those tapes were finally discovered, hidden in the ceiling of the Bernardo home and not surrendered to police until September 1994, everything changed. The tapes showed that Karla Homolka had not been a passive victim. She had been an active and willing participant. The deal with the devil had already been signed. Paul Bernardo stood trial in 1995. Karla Homolka testified against him. She sat in that courtroom and described events in detail, calmly, quietly, and with what observers described as icy detachment. Bernardo was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. He was designated a dangerous offender. The public watched all of it, and the outrage was immediate and overwhelming. A woman who had participated in the rape and murder of 2 teenage girls, and in the death of her own sister, was going to walk free after 12 years. Canada had never seen anything like it. On July 5, 2005, Karla Homolka was released from prison having served her full 12-year sentence. The release made international headlines. Crowds gathered outside the prison. Protesters held signs. Her face was on the front page of every newspaper in the country. She was placed under strict conditions. She could not contact Bernardo, could not possess violent pornography, and had to inform police of her whereabouts. Within months, she had moved to Montreal. She later moved to Guadeloupe in the French Caribbean. She remarried, the brother of one of her former lawyers. She had 3 children. In 2017, it was reported that Karla Homolka had returned to Quebec and was volunteering at a Montreal area elementary school. At the same school her children attended. Parents were not informed of her identity or her history. When the story broke, the reaction was swift and furious. The school board confirmed she had been volunteering. They stated they had not been aware of her background. She was asked to stop volunteering. The story reignited every question Canada had spent 25 years asking about the deal that let her go. As of 2026, Karla Homolka is 55 years old. She lives in Quebec, Canada. She has never publicly expressed remorse for what happened to Leslie Mahaffey, Kristen French, or her own sister Tammy. Paul Bernardo remains in prison. In November 2023, he was controversially transferred to a medium security facility, a decision that sparked immediate public outrage and a government inquiry. His most recent parole application in November 2024 was denied. The victims' families have never stopped fighting to ensure he never walks free. Tammy Homolka was 15 years old. She was killed in her own home by the people who were supposed to protect her. Leslie Mahaffey was 14 years old. Kristen French was 15 years old. They were taken from the streets on ordinary afternoons and never came home. They deserve so much more than the justice that was served.